Donald Trump calls the election rigged and talks about his conversion to the pro-life cause. Raymond Arroyo offers a preview of his exclusive interview. The Clinton campaign responds to more stolen emails, what they reveal about her closest aides. Italy suffers damage from another earthquake, how it's rattling people all the way to Rome. And a new front in the battle against ISIS, when troops could surround the terror group's capital. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, October 27, 2016. Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Donald Trump reaches out to the key voting bloc of Catholics, speaking with EWTN's Raymond Arroyo. The interview airs tonight, just 12 days before America picks its next president. For more, we go to Jason Calvi reporting at the White House tonight. Jason?
Wyatt, the road to the White House runs right through some very Catholic states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida. Raymond Arroyo asked Donald Trump about some issues important to Catholics, including abortion, religious liberty, Trump's favorite saint, and the election.
You mentioned Hillary Clinton. She is saying your unwillingness to accept the election results, which happened at the last debate, she says this poses a direct threat to our democracy. Does it?
You know who it really said it pretty well was Obama. When he was running in his first election, they asked him the same question, and he talked about rigged elections and rigged everything else. Our system is rigged.
The interview is part of Trump's ongoing outreach to people of faith. Among white Catholics, the Public Religion Research Institute had Trump ahead of Clinton 56 to 31% in early October. That lead has now shrunk. Trump with 48 and Clinton with 41%. Back in 2012, 59% of white Catholics voted for Romney over Obama. And faith is certainly playing out on the trail today in Nebraska.
You know, if you're inclined to do what the Pences do from time to time, to bow the head or bend the knee, it'd be a pretty good time to do it in the next 12 days. Really would.
Trump's running mate encourages voters to pray for the country, not for one outcome or another. And in battleground Ohio, Tim Kaine, Clinton's running mate, cites the parable of the Good Samaritan.
The person's asking for help. They just walk on by. I'm sure somebody walked on by in that story and said, "You're a loser," and kept walking on by, right? I'm not going to walk on by.
Many pro-lifers ask why that doesn't extend to the unborn.
Women should be able to make their own health care decisions.
And tomorrow, Hillary Clinton will rally with the presidents of Planned Parenthood and NARAL Pro-Choice America in Iowa. Donald Trump today is in Ohio. Tomorrow, New Hampshire. And Wyatt, about the interview tonight, Raymond Arroyo says it's the most relaxed he's ever seen Donald Trump.
Jason Calvi reporting from the White House. Thanks, Jason. And you can see Raymond's complete interview on The World Over beginning tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN. Stolen emails reveal more about Hillary Clinton's campaign. Insiders expressed concern about her private email server. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
Newly released stolen emails showed the distress in Hillary Clinton's inner circle the moment the news broke in March 2015 about her use of a private server.
Wow.
On March 7th, Philippe Reines, one of her longest-serving advisors, writing, "There is just no good answer. One word per line, seemingly for emphasis."
I'm particularly honored that she's here.
In other stolen emails, on March 2nd and 3rd, Neera Tanden, co-chair of Clinton's transition team, writes to campaign manager John Podesta. She criticizes Clinton's top aides' handling of the private email servers, saying, why didn't they get this stuff out like 18 months ago? So crazy. And continuing in a follow-up email, I guess I know the answer. Tanden wrote, they wanted to get away with it. Tanden specifically referenced Cheryl Mills, deputy White House counsel under Bill Clinton and close aide to Hillary Clinton. This is a Cheryl special. Know you love her, but this stuff is like her Achilles heel or kryptonite. She just can't say no to this expletive.
Thank you.
The Clinton campaign has not commented on specific emails, saying they are stolen and they can't verify their authenticity. The U.S. intelligence community blames the Russian state for the hacks, which have solely targeted the Democratic Party. Several hacked emails make references to Clinton's head, which may be linked to her head injury, leading some to question if she fully recovered. In one, on September 26, 2015, John Podesta writes to communication director Jennifer Palmieri, "How bad is her head?" Palmieri writes back, "Don't know. Huma left here about an hour ago. I just pinged again to ask about prep. Haven't heard back." A Clinton campaign official did respond to this email, saying they are clearly talking about her frame of mind or her mood. Lauren Ashburn, EWTN News Nightly.
With less than 2 weeks before the election, pollsters are working overtime to predict who will win and how big that win might be. Joining us now is Carlin Bowman, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Carlin, Donald Trump is refuting polls showing Hillary Clinton has a lead. He points to the Brexit polls, which incorrectly predicted Britain would stay in the European Union. How accurate are presidential polls?
Well, there have been a lot of epic failures of presidential polls in this election cycle. We saw it not only in Brexit, we saw it more recently in the FARC referendum in Colombia. So a lot of people are raising questions about the polls. But nearly all of the polls in the United States seem to be moving in the same direction. They suggest that Hillary Clinton has a solid lead. And certainly what we've seen in past elections is that candidates who are behind begin to criticize the polls.
Well, Election Day itself is fast approaching. What groups are the most important to poll in these last days? Is it Catholic voters, working class voters?
Well, certainly white Catholic voters have an almost perfect record of predicting the winner, so I'm looking very carefully at those voters overall. But I think the most important thing that I look at this point is party identification. Right now, Hillary has all of the Democratic loyalists, nearly 90% of them in her camp. Trump is at about 83%. He needs to bring that up substantially if he's going to be victorious.
You know, one of the interesting things about this election has been that voters have been crossing party lines. Is that impacting poll results, and who benefits more from those voters?
Well, certainly voters have been crossing party lines. They've been looking at down ballot races very differently from the way that they're looking at the top of the ticket overall. They might be voting for the Democrat at the top of the ticket, but the Republican in the Senate contest overall. That just makes the job more difficult overall.
It is interesting looking at all these polls and trying to sort through what. Carlin Bowman, we appreciate your breaking it down for us.
Thank you.
Now to other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Some of the buildings that survived Italy's earthquake in August have now collapsed following major aftershocks. The Amatrice City Hall and centuries-old church tower in Camerino are both destroyed, and the mayor of Usita says his town has been devastated, with up to 80% of the houses no longer inhabitable. Emergency crews are still assessing the damage. Mary Shevlin joins us now from Rome. Mary, describe the reaction when the quakes hit yesterday.
Wyatt, it was one of fear because if we remember, it was almost 2 months ago to the day that we had the devastating earthquake here in central Italy that killed 300 people. So an earthquake measuring about 5.4 on the Richter scale, striking at 7 p.m., put everyone in panic all throughout the country. But when another one struck that was even stronger 2 hours later, it was a real nightmare. Many today thanking God that there were no fatalities directly linked to these quakes, but the fear that it's left behind of what could happen next has everyone on edge.
What about the victims of the latest earthquake? What do they need?
Well, so many are displaced in the thousands. So in central Italy, all of the little towns that were affected, many not wanting to go the great distances that they would need to go to get to a nearby hotel. It would be a little bit far from where they're living, so they don't want to go and leave their home behind. And they're unsure that those structures would even be secure in the case of another earthquake. So many of these people are sleeping in their cars. Now, Italian authorities are saying we can't set up tent cities, if you were, to accommodate these people who have been displaced because it's winter and the winter temperatures are setting in these mountainous areas. So really lodging is the biggest question, and everyone being able to get the best information they can to help them realize that the next quake maybe won't happen tonight or tomorrow, or maybe not even next month. So calming those fears.
Well, Mary, I know that our EWTN News Nightly team, as well as the EWTN News Nightly viewers, are going to be praying for all of the victims. Mary Shevlin joining us from Rome. Mary, thanks very much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Iraqi commanders say their forces are making progress in the fight against ISIS. The Iraqi army is now just 20 miles from the country's second largest city, Mosul. Coalition forces say they are destroying defensive tunnels in and around the city. ISIS militants are using suicide car bombs and firing mortar rounds to slow down the advance of Iraqi troops. It's expected to take weeks, if not months, to drive ISIS out of its last urban stronghold in Iraq, which is still a home to more than 1 million people. We could be weeks away from a major offensive against ISIS in Syria, but U.S. officials warn the terror group may be planning a plot of their own. The top U.S. military commander now sounding an alarm about Raqqa, a city of nearly 250,000, where top ISIS commanders, including Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, have long been thought to be hiding.
There's an imperative to get isolation in place around Raqqa because our intelligence feeds tell us that there is a significant external operations attacks planning going on, emanating centralized in Raqqa.
How urgent is it?
We think it's very important to get isolation in place around Raqqa to start controlling that environment on a pretty short timeline.
This as the fight for Mosul goes on. Emotional scenes of families being reunited. Defense Secretary Ash Carter says this second front will begin very soon.
I think it will be within weeks. That's what I want to say.
From earlier fighting in northern Syria, the U.S. already has intelligence on ISIS plotting against the U.S. and France, Townsend says. The concern here in Raqqa, the target and timing of ISIS' next attack, is not clear.
We know they're up to something. And it's an external plot. We don't know exactly where. We don't know exactly when. We're going to try to head it off.
But in this densely populated city, finding plotters and those who may already have sent operatives overseas will be tough. The secretive Joint Special Operations Command, which includes Navy SEALs and Army Delta Force, is now in charge of stopping ISIS plotters. U.S. troops will continue training and advising local forces earmarked for the Raqqa fight. But a huge hurdle, getting enough Kurdish and Arab fighters to get Raqqa back and hold on to it. Russian President Vladimir Putin defends Russia's intervention in Syria. He refuses to end the Russian onslaught of Aleppo, arguing that the U.S. attack on Raqqa should also be stopped before it even begins. Coming up, the Vatican addresses the growing problem of human trafficking and how it often leads to sexual exploitation. And Planned Parenthood gets a boost in money despite a string of setbacks. Pope Francis said God weeps for the victims of war, which are often waged over greed. The Holy Father spoke during his daily Mass, saying God offers us all peace and love. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. A review of charitable giving across the country shows a boost for Planned Parenthood. The abortion provider came under fire last year when the Center for Medical Progress released undercover videos that purportedly caught Planned Parenthood trying to sell baby body parts. Still, private donors increased their gifts to Planned Parenthood, with donations rising 11% to nearly $188 million. An Iowa church drops its lawsuit over transgender bathroom rules. Iowa says people can use the bathroom of their choice regardless of privacy concerns. The Fort Des Moines Church of Christ filed a lawsuit saying the rules violated the free exercise of religious rights. But it withdrew the lawsuit yesterday after the Iowa Civil Rights Commission made it clear that churches are generally exempt. Pope Francis meets with members of an organization he founded 2 years ago to try and eradicate human trafficking and modern-day slavery. The Holy Father says there needs to be a concerted effort to eliminate the source of the problem and assist the victims. The FBI and U.S. Homeland Security Department are helping spearhead the group's effort to stop human trafficking. They say the partnerships are making a difference.
The combination of us working with the church, we have partners everywhere. So whether it's federal, local, state, tribal partners, partnerships is what's going to make a difference here. And we will partner with whoever's going to make that difference.
The need is great. There's millions and millions, tens of millions of people on the move around the globe. There has to be a lawful, thoughtful process to deal with folks who are needy and places where, we're able to rescue them.
The Santa Marta Group says human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry used by groups like ISIS and Boko Haram to fund terrorism. Joining us now is Eliza Riak, Director of Programs for Shared Hope International. Eliza, your organization focuses on sex trafficking and providing resources to victims, but much of that work involves specifically child sex trafficking. How big of a problem is that here in the U.S.?
Well, specific numbers are hard to come by because this is such an underground crime. However, we know that when it comes to the population of human trafficking victims in the U.S., the majority of victims are in fact U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents. By federal definition, anyone under the age of 18 that's coerced into a commercial sex act is a victim of human trafficking, whether or not there's that element of force, fraud, or coercion involved. We see especially youth that are vulnerable within our child welfare system and our juvenile justice system. Basically the same things that would make a young person vulnerable to child abuse is likely what's going to make them vulnerable to sex trafficking. So some numbers that we do know, for instance, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children said 1 in every 5 endangered runaways is likely to be a victim of sex trafficking. And of those stats, over 75% were already involved in the foster care system when they ran away from their placement. In addition,
wow, such a high number. I mean, what do you think needs to happen in the U.S. to help combat that?
There are a lot of things that need to happen. Certainly, to respond, we need stronger services, but at the beginning, we need to, one, identify these young people. The number one reason a young person isn't going to receive services is because they're simply not identified. But further, we need to make sure that there's not a demand for sex with these children in the first place. There wouldn't be incentive for a young person to need to be exploited, and certainly not for these traffickers to go after our kids if there wasn't somebody wanting to pay for and buy sex from them.
What are the best resources for victims of sex trafficking, and how easy is it for victims to get those resources?
That's a great question, and it's a hard question to answer. It's a really complicated issue in general because young people were often in the past thought of as prostitutes. Even though they could never consent to sex, there's a stigma in our society around prostituted people and commercial sex where these young people were sort of otherized. So it's just now that they're being identified as victims over the last 10 years and that we're looking for a response. However, 35 states still charge youth. As of 2015, we've actually seen a few more states with work we're doing pass non-criminalization laws. But as of 2015, 35 states still charged children with prostitution, which made it very hard to get them access to services. Once they're identified, we also want to make sure that they're getting appropriate services for the trauma that they've incurred, but don't want to necessarily define them by that trauma. So services look very different, but to be honest, we're building the plane as we fly it a little bit because their trauma tends to be so severe and the attachment to their traffickers can cause major safety challenges.
And we know that you guys are working hard for that. Eliza Riak, with the Director of Programs for Shared Hope International, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Up next, Supreme Court vacancy, why Ted Cruz says it may stay that way, and remembering Justice Scalia, what Catholics can learn from his example. Thank you for joining us this Thursday evening, October 27th. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. China's Communist Party elevates the country's president, Xi Jinping, to the core of its leadership. That today as members of the Communist Party call on members to unite around the party leadership. The move is considered mainly symbolic, but it does represent how the president has asserted himself as one of China's most powerful leaders in decades. His elevation also appears to be an effort to crack down on corruption within the party. The United Nations General Assembly votes tomorrow on members of its Human Rights Council. Despite its continued bombing attacks in Syria, Russia is up for re-election, as are China and Saudi Arabia. Joining us now is Brett Schaefer, a fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Brett, why are nations that have a history of human rights abuses eligible for membership on the UN Human Rights Council?
Well, it's an interesting question. The UN Human Rights Council was created in 2006, and it was created to replace the Commission on Human Rights, which at the time had become so discredited because these members were human rights abusers, and they operated in the commission to protect themselves and protect other countries that abused their citizens and denied them basic rights. And so they replaced it with the Human Rights Council, and it was supposed to be better. And unfortunately, when the council was created, they didn't establish really any kind of standards for membership. Countries are supposed to announce pledges and commitments to human rights when they run for election, but they've gamed the system. There's no real obligation to vet these pledges and to verify that they're actually accurate. And we get these very farcical pledges. You know, China says that they observe human rights and religious freedom. Russia says that they don't purge journalists. Saudi Arabia says that they are a defender of women's rights. You get these farcical things, yet nonetheless they are elected to the Human Rights Council
So then what is the U.S.'s position on China and Russia being in the council?
The U.S. doesn't like the fact that human rights abusers are on the Human Rights Council. They would like that body to be more effective, but the U.S. very rarely speaks up. And when they talk about these sorts of things, it's always sort of, well, we regret that this is happening, and they don't really take a concerted effort to try and fight these candidacies by Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, other countries as well. And it's unfortunate because, as I mentioned, these countries game the system. For instance, there's 4 open slots in Asia right now. 4 countries are running. And all you have to do is get a majority of the General Assembly to get elected. And so when only 4 countries run, it's a pretty easy thing to get elected.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia. I mean, do you think it undermines the moral authority of the council if you have Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia all on the UN Human Rights Council?
It not only undermines the moral authority of the Human Rights Council, it undermines its effectiveness. When you take a look at what these countries do, they protect each other. They try and shield each other from scrutiny. They go through sort of a mutual praise society. There's something called the Universal Periodic Review, where countries say, this is our human rights record, and other countries step forward to address them or criticize them. And what it ends up being is countries rushing forward to protect each other from really harsh criticism and scrutiny. And unfortunately, it really undermines the ability of the Council to do what it should do, which is champion human rights.
Really quickly, I want to turn to Cuba because for the first time yesterday, or at least in 25 years, the U.S. abstained from voting on a UN resolution ending the economic embargo against Cuba. Why did they abstain? Why is that significant?
Well, this is sort of a reflection of the Obama administration's shift in Cuba policy. They want to engage Cuba, and they want Congress to repeal U.S. laws establishing the embargo on Cuba. And that's fine. If the administration wants to pursue that, they have to convince Congress to follow through with repealing the law. But to go to the UN and essentially abandon the defense of U.S. policy in front of all of these other countries for the first time in 25 years, it's frankly unprecedented and disgraceful for the administration to do that. The purpose of the administration is to go and defend the United States and represent our interests in these bodies, not to sort of project domestic politics onto this world stage.
It is a very complicated issue. Brett Schaefer from the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Senator Ted Cruz says it's possible Republicans could refuse to fill the Supreme Court's vacant seat if Hillary Clinton is elected. Cruz is now the second Republican to suggest that the GOP will block any Democratic nominee. Arizona Senator John McCain made a similar statement earlier this month. Senate Republicans have refused to hold hearings for President Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland, following Antonin Scalia's unexpected death in February. And Catholics in the nation's capital honor the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. Last night, Justice Scalia's family accepted a posthumous award named after Pope John Paul II. Scalia is remembered for his belief that faith must have a strong voice in the public square.
Justice Scalia emphasized a fundamental Christian lesson, that our choices really matter and that everything depends on them.
Catholic leaders and young professionals gather in Washington to remember the life and legacy of Antonin Scalia. Scalia is being recognized with the 2016 John Paul II New Evangelization Award, given to those who demonstrate a commitment to proclaiming Christ to all peoples. Dr. Robert George served as MC.
John Paul II asked for us not only to be good models of moral uprightness and integrity, but also to be willing, as Justice Scalia was so willing, to speak publicly about our faith.
Dr. George noted Scalia once said, "Be fools for Christ," not worrying about criticism from the outside world. Justice Scalia's son, Father Paul Scalia, says his father didn't wear his faith on his sleeve. He didn't want to be known as a Catholic justice, but he says his father never shied away from his faith.
It's the same kind of courage that John Paul II showed, as well, when he would, go to every corner of the globe to proclaim Christ. My father was not an evangelist in that sense, but he was a public figure who wanted people to know that living out their Catholic faith was a great way of serving the nation as well.
Father Paul says he and his family are grateful for the outpouring of support that came after his father died in February. Father Arnie Panula is the director of D.C.'s Catholic Information Center, which hosts the award dinner. He says young people can learn a lot from Justice Scalia.
I think that it's that combination of a professional focus, solid professional intellectual focus, and at the same time a faith which moves him to have a real concern for the common individual.
Our thanks to Father Arnie and the Catholic Information Center for hosting last night's dinner. Several members of our EWTN News Nightly team were happy to attend. For the entire team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Good night and God bless.